So it was around about that time that your interest in epithelial iron transport began, I think. So what triggered that switch from what you were doing for your PhD to iron transport?
I tried to survey what was going on in pharmacology. It went in a strange way at that time. You know, everybody would be working on catecholamines, and then all of a sudden that would stop, and everybody would be working on 5-HT, and then it might be histamine, and so on. And most people followed the crowd. That was the first thing. The second thing, nearly all of them ended up recording something where tension was recorded in a piece of muscle. And I really just thought to myself that there really ought to be something else you could record. Surely other things were going on besides muscle shortening, you know. There were already people at it. Don Jenkinson, you see, at University College, was putting microelectrodes into liver cells and finding, you know, all sorts of things happened with adrenaline, noradrenaline, and electrical signals were happening, but of course the liver just sat there. So clearly there was a whole pharmacology wasn't being looked at, and so on. I mean, even in the department, of course we had grown to about 4 or 5 by this time, and Keith Matthews had joined us from Canada, and at Arnold's suggestion he was putting microelectrodes into endocrine cells, and for instance getting all sorts of signals which have never been recorded before from, say, pancreatic islet cells in response to glucose. So I think I was driven by thinking there must be more to it than just recording from muscle. Everything goes in through some barrier, and everything you lose goes out through a barrier, and there must be processes that are worth looking at and are modifiable by drugs.
Yeah. So in the late 1980s you turned your attention to cystic fibrosis, on which you still work. What was it that first interested you in CF, and what approach did you take?
Well, it wasn't that much of a change if you think about it. First of all, I mean, what you're suggesting is I changed from looking at sodium channels to looking at chloride channels, which I guess is to some extent what I did. On the other hand, I'd been working with chloride channels in the kinin area for some time with Harry Margolius and his group. But as you well know, in cystic fibrosis, one of the first ways you can detect somebody has that disease is that mothers always complain that when they kiss their young babies, they taste salty. And that was one of the diagnostic features before we knew anything about the genetics of the disease. Now, the idea was that the sweat was secreted in the secretory coil, and it couldn't be reabsorbed because the sodium couldn't be reabsorbed. And there was talk of circulating amiloride-like substances. So this was spot on what I'd spent a number of years being interested in, the amiloride-sensitive sodium channel. And it wasn't until 1983 that Quilliam showed that it was the chloride channels deficient in CF. And of course, if you can't absorb the chloride, then the sodium can't follow, so it still tastes salty. The other thing is we were terribly fortunate being located where we were, close to Wellcome CRC, because that's where Martin Evans was, and him and his stem cells, which he more recently got awarded a Nobel Prize. And he was able, with his technologies and his group, to produce transgenic mice with this disease. And of course that led us down that pathway, thinking that, in fact, gene therapy might be the way in which this disease was dealt with. Well, of course, it's still not dealt with. And in my view, I think gene therapy for this disease is a long, long way off. And I think a pharmacotherapeutic approach is far more likely, and indeed currently there are some really quite promising drugs in clinical trial.
So you think the prospects are good then?
I think they are better than they've ever been, and give some considerable hope to people with this disease.